The Bob Murphy Show, episode 369.
There's a tidal wave coming. What you gonna do?
Get ready for another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. It's your source for commentary and interviews conducted by a Christian and economist. Now here's your host, Bob Murphy.
Hey everyone, welcome back to The Bob Murphy Show. Today I'm speaking with Spike Cohen. Many of you know him from Twitter/X, but probably he gained the most popularity among libertarians when he was the vice presidential candidate on the LP ticket in the 2020 election. Just to read a little bit here from his official bio, Spike Cohen is a successful business owner, libertarian activist, and media figure. He's the founder and president of You Are the Power, a nonprofit focused on using solutions-oriented activism to grow the liberty movement. Spike started a web design company as a teenager in 1998. In 2017, he retired from web design to focus on effective political messaging, entertainment, and activism. This culminated with him becoming Libertarian candidate for vice president in 2020, where he traveled the nation, meeting countless Americans and sharing the message of liberty with them. So in this interview, we cover, the 2020 presidential or vice presidential run and how he got into that and so forth. His organization, You Are the Power, and that's very compelling, and I think you'll be very heartened to hear about what Spike's achieved with that and what they're continuing to achieve. And also, he's recently had 2 debates, and we talk about that in the early part of the interview. And then finally, we conclude with Spike recently tweeted out that he had become a born-again Christian. And so we talk about that at the end of this. So it was a very interesting discussion. I think you'll get a lot out of it. And without further ado, here's my discussion with Spike Cohen. Well, Spike, welcome to the Bob Murphy Show.
I'm happy to be here, Bob. Thanks, man.
Now, we were chit-chatting before I hit record, and I had gone over the topics with you. There's one that is going to be an ambush. I was looking at your Wikipedia article.
Oh, no. I knew it.
Your nickname, Spike is not what's on your birth certificate, I take it. And
it is not.
It
no.
says it was based on a cartoon that you were watching as a kid, and I thought, oh, he's named after Spike, the guy, the human that helps the Autobots. He's kind of younger, and then in the first movie, he's a grown-up. He's got
that would be a better...
Yeah,
choice.
And
yeah.
that's not what it was. So I don't know if you want to explain or just let the listeners go to your Wikipedia page and find out. I'm not even going to say it.
No, it's probably better if I explain. First of all, how dare you? I would expect this from the lamestream media, but not you, Bob. It's funny. Michael Malice actually got the scoop on you with this back during the campaign when he told everyone that I was a brony. Which is not factually accurate. A brony is an adult who's into My Little Pony. I was like 3. In fact, I think I was actually 2. If you look at the timing, I would have been 2 years old, 2 or 3. My given name is Jeremy, and that's actually still my legal name. I never changed it or anything. And my older brother, who is much older, he's from my dad's first marriage, so he's always been like an uncle to me more than like a traditional where a brother's a couple years older. So he was in his teens when I was a toddler, and so he convinced me that Jeremy was a girl's name and that he had no idea why my parents gave me that name, that it was like Julie or Jenny or Jeremy. It's a girl's name. And so I was very, very upset. And when I was either 2 or 3, we went to see the My Little Pony movie. And there's the purple dragon Spike, who's kind of the plot device character that maximizes the amount of toy sales you can get toddlers to want to help generate for your company. I didn't understand any of that at the time. And so to see this, this character that becomes the thing that ends up saving the day, I was all excited. And in my all of my toddler wisdom, I decided what a perfect name. And so I insisted on being called Spike. And I absolutely should have retconned that to say that it was about the guy who helped the Autobots, but I'm being honest. And my parents initially tried to just keep calling me Jeremy since that was my name and I was 3. And I kept insisting. They ended up actually having a child behavioralist look at me to see if everything was okay. This is before they fully understood autism. And they said, no, he seems fine. Yeah, just call him Spike. This is a phase. It'll wear off at some point. He'll get over it. I'm now 42. If it is a phase, it's a very long one. So
this is like Richard Nixon temporarily suspending gold convertibility.
It's like there's nothing more permanent than Spike temporarily changing his name. Yes.
There's a lot of directions I could take that with, the kid identifying and and the girl's name. But I will just say you did the most, like, in terms of getting me back by saying, oh yeah, Michael Ball's beat you to the punch, Bob. That is truly the,
you hurt me. I hurt you, Bob.
Yes. I hurt you. If you cut me, do I not bleed? All right. So I think what I want to talk about first with you is, you have debated a couple of prominent people, and maybe more.
Yeah.
The two I'm familiar with, you debated David Hogg on, it was gun control, right? Was the thing.
Yeah.
And then Destiny, you debated on just more broadly, like libertarianism, and you were at like a Students for Liberty or something. Is that right?
Yeah, I was at a Students for Liberty event, and I believe that's what we debated. I told you this. I was in such excruciating. I had blown my back out. I actually hurt my back, injured my back, and almost had to pull out of the event because I was in such pain. And I basically just I'm a recovering drug addict, so I won't take like opioids or any kind of pain pills. But I figured if I took an unsafe dose of Advil every day, that seemed to keep it just enough ibuprofen in my blood to just be able to get through that. So I remember that I did it. And I think we had a bit of a lengthy part of that debate about Ukraine and NATO and the military industrial complex. Past that, I don't remember much because I think I even said when I started, I was like, hey folks, I'm in a lot of pain right now. So I'm not fully coherent there. The Hogg one, I remember much better.
Okay, and yeah, you did make and you got a good laugh, so you sounded perfectly coherent in the libertarianism debate, and you did fine.
That's good.
I don't know what kind of a dragon suffers from back pain, but we'll put that aside.
Turns out changing your name does not make you escape familial degenerative disc issues. I'm very sad to say, yeah.
So maybe we'll do the Destiny one and we can just do all that briefly, and then, as you say, because the Hogg one is, and also that's more prominent, him being such a well-known proponent of gun control.
Right,
so with Destiny, so one thing, and I don't want to put you in a weird spot here, like if you want to just be nice to everybody, but the reason I was interested in the Destiny one, I don't know if you know this, Spike, but lately, I'm like, why the heck is this guy Destiny all over? Like Jordan Peterson has him out, all these people. And one of the things people kept telling me was, because he's such a phenomenal debater. And I said, okay, well, point to example, like, let me see. And the one they pointed me to, is his fan. It wasn't like a critic. And I went and watched, and I did a whole episode, and I thought he was bad. And I don't just mean I disagreed with his stance on the resolution. I mean, if he had just been assigned that, and I was like a high school debating judge, I would have thought no. So anyway, and likewise, watching yours, it's not just that, I'm a libertarian, so I disagree. I mean, I would have done a way better job against you in that debate. And, I don't want to say my grandma would have done a better job, but I was not impressed by him. So I'm just wondering, like, I thought you destroyed him. Like, it's not even that you destroyed him. It was just like he asked some kind of, I thought, rudimentary questions, and you just kind of, you hit him out of the park very well. And it was a good conversation to listen to, but it was just more like the student asking the physicist, can you explain special relativity? Because I don't understand it.
Yeah. So from what I remember, it opened with him like asking like, but how would libertarianism deal with like patents? And,
I can remind you because I just listened to it. It was 3 things. It was patents, and specifically like for medical issue. You know what I mean? So it was I was kind of surprised. Military defense, which fair enough. But then even there, you quickly got him to say, you like kind of clarified, and you said, I mean, I take it you and I are both opponents of like the current military industrial complex.
And he said, no, I love it.
He said, I love it. And you even had to clarify and say you're saying it non-ironically, because he said it in such a enthusiastic that one would have supposed like, oh, he must be trolling or something. And no, and he said, yes, I love it. And then the other one was welfare.
Oh, welfare. Yeah. Well, knowing me, I probably would have said there's going to be a lot less need for welfare if the government wasn't creating barriers to entry in every single aspect of life that creates more poverty in the process. Yeah. So, I mean, that's it. My recollection of the debate, it's funny because I feel like I'm talking about my days of drug addiction. What I recall is that, but I believe that it was, I believe it was mostly him like saying, yeah, but what about whatever? And then I'd respond and he'd go, well, yeah, but what about whatever the next thing was?
Yeah.
It didn't feel like there was, from what I read, it didn't seem like there was like substantive back and forth on major issues, except very briefly about war. He seems to be really good about, like, I shouldn't say he's good about war. He's very like, he'll fight about that. Like he's very pro that. And I just remember it being like, I felt like it was a lot of elementary stuff. And I even remember afterwards, I'm like, that couldn't have gone as well as I thought it did. It must be the combination of the heroic dose of ibuprofen I've taken combined with the excruciating physical pain that I'm in that makes me think that. But then I kept having people the rest of that day come up and go, man, you just destroyed Destiny. I'm like, that's great.
Yeah.
It was so to answer your question, I'm not sure. I know he's had a couple of viral clips. One where he was on the what's that guy's name? I was on his show too. Jesse Lee Peterson. And that there was some stuff from that went viral. And then I think there was like a couple times of him, like, you know, like a 30-second clip of him owning someone or something. So I think he's like the Ben Shapiro of the, I don't even know if he calls himself the left, of the liberal center left progressive, whatever he considers himself. I have to assume it's that. But honestly, like when I see these, like kind of a lot of these Twitch stream debate people, a lot of them aren't really that great. So maybe it's just he got his, you know, I guess again, like Ben Shapiro, who became famous beating up on like college kids who, you know, maybe weren't ready to start debating yet. It might be a similar thing with him, but I honestly, I don't really follow that stuff well. I just know whenever I see these clips of like Vosh or any of these people, and it's like, man, this guy's great. And then I watch and I'm like, I'm kind of like you. I'm like, my sainted grandmother would destroy these people, and she hated arguing.
Let me ask you this: do you remember when you knew that's what was going to happen? You were going to be on the stage, you know, either debating him or having an appointed conversation, or however it was billed to you. Were you like, oh, I better be on my A game because it's Destiny? Like, did he have a reputation in your mind at that point, or were you just like, okay, I'm going to debate some streamer on this?
I didn't know who he was.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that same thing with me. Like, I feel like I don't even know this guy, and then people keep like, Bob, he's like the OG of, you know, streamer. And anyway, okay.
Well, and that I believe is true. After the fact, I found out he's one of the pioneers of the Twitch streaming debate while you play video games genre that's become so popular now. I didn't really know that. So I knew he was like a streamer who did debates, and that was about the extent of it. I didn't know how popular he was. I didn't know, you know, who he had debated or anything like that. And so I just went into it kind of like, all right, that's fine. And I probably, I will say in terms of like when I've debated, when I debated Dave Smith, when I debated Destiny, I didn't really like do a lot of study beforehand. I was just like, I'll just go in, and I in neither of those was I like, yeah, I'm going to go into this because I'm going to take this guy's head off, especially the one with Dave. I wanted to really like legitimately go back and forth on our disagreements on some of the finer points about immigration. But it wasn't about like, I'm going to make my career on I destroyed Dave or anything like that.
Right.
Nor was he doing that. With the David Hogg one, I brought, you know, charts because I was like, I wanted to go in and be like, listen, I'm going to like systematically dismantle every single talking point about that the left has, or the anti-gun rights people have about the concept of gun rights, gun control, public safety, all of that. And so that one I did like maybe like I should have done in all of my debates. But yeah, I recall the Destiny one just being like, I went in, I spent a lot of the time thinking, I wonder if this is going as well as I think it is because I'm in such a bad place in
Yeah.
my health and well-being in this moment. If this is like when you're dying, you feel that warmth,
Right,
and
right.
like even though you're actually dying, if this was like
Mhm.
like these might be my final moments, and it just seems like I'm debating this well and this easily, but in reality, my organs are shutting down or something. Turns out, no, I actually did a good job. So
There was one. I thought he raised one good. I didn't listen to the whole thing. I listened maybe like 40 minutes of it or something.
okay.
And you were just doing great. And like I said, I just stopped because I thought, okay, I can, Destiny was not putting up a lot of novel scenarios for me to think like, how would I have answered that? I see how Spike handled it. The one though that intrigued me, and I'll just let you, and then we can move on to the David Hogg one, is he was talking about military defense, and he was saying, because if it's too decentralized, you're just kind of relying on, weekend warriors and just, citizen militia kind of thing. If there's no centralized, authority to like organize a standing army and to deploy it, then if Mexico wanted to just come into what we now call Texas, and not go against Houston or San Antonio, but just like take a bunch of the wide open kind of empty land, why are the people in Dallas going to organize a force to go send it, 100 miles away to repel them? Like, what do they care? It was that
Right.
kind of, I remember him saying it, but he's basically saying, aren't there large stretches of empty land that some foreign army would come in and take? So I'm just curious. I mean, I remember what you said at the thing, but theoretically, I was like, okay, right, because it's kind of like citizen defense and everybody's armed, you can't occupy them. But if it's basically uninhabited anyway, then there's no one there.
Yeah, so that's the most effective rebuttal to the behind every blade of grass argument, right? Because it's like, well, they'd never take us over anyway because we all have guns, and it's like, yeah, or they could just occupy an area that's relatively sparsely populated and then build out from there. That's an argument for having some level of collective defensive agreement between people, whether it's between if we're talking about a national divorce and now there's individual defense agreements between states, or if we're talking the true Ancapistan, post-state society where all these different, whether they're covenant communities or voluntary communities or whatever that, have these collective agreements together. That still doesn't mean that we should have a large central government who, takes trillions of dollars from this forced tax cattle populace, wastes most of it, and then uses some of it presumably for defense. And then especially when you get into the longer stuff about like, okay, well, why would they be invading in the first place? In the case of most of the conflict against the U.S. proper and its interest in the last 100 years, it's mostly been a combination of blowback and the results of our being involved in entangling alliances. So it even asked the question of how many people would even want to fight with us, whatever us looked like to begin with. But I recall like during my saying that was when I said something along the lines of, I assume that we're both against this like ridiculous murderous complex we have in place right now. And he was like, no, that's good. It's a good thing. And the crazy thing was that he kept equating it to, well, that's how we defend against Russia. And I'm like, well, I mean, buddy, the NATO's record or I guess the West's record in terms of violence against its neighbors and mass murder makes Russia blush. Like, and so if the argument is we need this thing to fight back against aggressors, then that could equally be Russia and China and the BRICS nations argument for making their version of NATO to fight against us. I would say it's an argument not to do those things.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, so yeah, I think in any situation there should be some kind of collective defense, or there would need to be some kind of agreement in place because of that type of thing. I just don't think it has to be anywhere near what we have now. And what we have now isn't all that effective to begin with. I mean, we had a weather balloon fly slowly over the breadth of our nation and nothing happened to it. So, how defended are we right now?
Yeah, that's a point I made. One of the points you just made there when I wrote my pamphlet arguing for Texas independence, that it's wrong to think of it as, oh, what if it's right now like the U.S. would take away its military?
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
No, Texas is an independent thing. Why would Mexico? Why would any country in Europe be afraid of it? Right? You could argue with Mexico might be afraid of like territorial expansion or something, but clearly it's not. Just like Switzerland, even Nazi Germany just went around them. They didn't feel the need to conquer them because they knew Switzerland poses no threat to us. If we're going to go be belligerent, we got to knock out people that might hit us first.
Yeah.
And so if you're really sure that there's this, extremely libertarian / ANCAP, whatever you want to call it, society just sitting there that's like a porcupine, it's going to be really painful for us to try to go invade. And they have free trade and they let us use their banks that are, have solid gold reserves and blah. It's like, why would you knock them out? You would just do deals with them and then go fight your actual enemies who pose a threat to you.
Right, exactly. Mexico's not invading the U.S. It's not because we have nukes or whatever. It's for the same reason the U.S. isn't invading Mexico, or that China's not invading all of its smaller neighbors, or for a variety of different give examples. The reason is because it makes more sense to continue having trade and at least relatively good relations with those countries, because that's better than, what's better, exchanging goods and services and becoming, wealthier and better off on both sides because of it, or trading guns and bombs and losing your loved ones and maybe getting territory out of it. I think it's a flawed premise. And it's like you said, they're always going like, okay, what if it was the status quo where everyone hated us or so many people hated us because of all these things, but those things, the reason for the hatred doesn't exist, but the hatred still does. Now what? Now where's your libertarian fantasy land gonna work there? And it is what it is. But yeah, that was an interesting debate from what I recall.
Okay, so moving on. So the David Hogg one, for one thing, how did that happen that you came to be debating him?
Yeah, so I actually I misremembered how it happened and was reminded of it by the person that helped put all this together. So my friend Brian Lambert, who's also he schedules anyone who does any kind of events and stuff that involve me, they know Brian. He had been trying to work out a debate with me and someone at Dartmouth. He had heard from someone there that the Dartmouth Political Union was trying to put together these debates on controversial subjects, and they were looking for people who could debate controversial subjects without it becoming this like bloodbath, one trying to own the other person. And so he kept saying, "Hey, Spike's happy to give the libertarian position on whatever." And they had the Dartmouth Political Union. They tried putting together multiple debates between me and socialist professors. Debating, capitalism versus socialism or free markets versus socialism. And almost all the professors said no. And then there were two or three that said yes. And then I presume that at some point they looked at my Twitter or my social media and saw my memes and said, no, I can't compete against those memes. And so they backed out. And so I forget it now if it was Brian or someone on the Dartmouth Political Union who said, what about debating David Hogg on guns? Maybe it was Brian. And they reached out and they asked me, and I'm like, yeah, okay, if you can get him. I don't know why you do it. There's no upside for him. And they reached out to David and he said, yeah, absolutely. And so it happened. And the whole time I kept waiting for like, he's going to drop out like all the lefty professors did. He didn't. To his credit, he showed up. He debated it, and that I will give him kudos. I still don't know why he did it. There was literally no upside for him at all to do it.
Mm-hmm. I listened to that one, and for sure I listened. I think Tom Woods interviewed you about it after it happened.
Yes,
and I think they had clips. So for sure I listened to the clips there, but I think I also clicked through and just listened to the whole thing. And I think you did very well, and I'm curious to hear like some of your takeaways from it. But I thought he was it was pretty amicable, David Hogg. You know what I mean? From his Twitter persona, I thought maybe he was going to be a bomb thrower or something, or just like, oh my God, you just, you don't care about dead kids or something. And that isn't how he came off.
No, we did a Zoom meeting beforehand, just to make sure everyone understood and agreed to the rules that DPU were putting forward and whatever. And he actually said, the reason I've never done a debate like this is because I don't want it to become us just arguing past each other of like, me saying that you want, that you just want the bodies to pile up, and you saying that I want the, people to be disarmed against the government or whatever. And I said, yeah, no, I mean, I'm going to explain in detail why I believe you're wrong on every single thing. but I have no real interest in making an accusation of you that probably isn't true. Like, I don't think that you actually think you're doing. I think that what you're proposing will lead to these bad outcomes, just like I'm sure you think that what I'm proposing would lead to bad outcomes. I don't think you actually want those bad outcomes. I think you just disagree on what the outcomes will be. And he said, yeah, that's how I feel. And I said, okay, great. And to his credit, I was ready, like, if he was going to start saying you did this, and he really didn't. At one point he said, these are NRA talking points to sell guns. And I responded by saying, you're like the greatest gun salesman ever. Every time you talk, millions of people go out and buy more guns and ammo. But that was about the most, I guess, quote unquote, heated that it got. So it was, we both agreed even beforehand that I wasn't going to travel all the way to New Hampshire and get, like advertise that I'm going to be at this event. And I go there and I'm just going like, meme stuff about how he just wants, he wants people to be disarmed or whatever. Like, there's no, I can do that on sitting here on my computer. Like, if I'm going to do that kind of stuff, I don't need to go and travel and do all that. And maybe that's my fatal conceit that's kept me from becoming a famous liberty influencer, is that I assume good intentions from my political opponents and seek to try to, talk about, I will dismantle an argument, but then I also want to then go back to, like, I suspect we agree on this and this and this, which is why I think you should probably agree with me on this. Maybe that's not as sexy as owning someone, but I've never been that's not, there's already people out there that are far better than me at owning people. I figure I can do this instead.
So do you remember like what you thought his strongest argument was and what your response was?
He didn't really, I didn't think so, that he really made a lot of arguments. It was weird. He actually started by saying, I want to look at this more as a discussion. And he kept mentioning the fact that I had like charts and stuff. And he was like, I don't really have a lot of charts. And it was a lot of like gut feeling stuff. He would say, like, his common refrain would be like, it's obviously the guns. And then I would explain how it's obviously not just the guns. And I would show like there's no correlation between gun ownership rates and murder rates in any country, including in this one, that, if that were true, then the murder rate in the US would be like 50 times higher than it is right now because our gun ownership rate's so high. And like, I just remember it was a lot of me saying, like, giving facts and then him saying, yeah, but it is the guns. And I was like, it's not the guns. I knew that it was going to just largely be, and I actually kind of dialed back on referencing the charts once I realized it wasn't worth what was being said. Didn't need to be shown on charts because when he said, listen, if you go to Europe, you just sort of naturally feel safer. And I was like, okay, so we're not debating anymore. Like, we're just giving our thoughts on feelings about safety and stuff.
Right.
So no, I don't, yeah, I don't, he didn't really try to make points the way you and I would say making a point. Like, there wasn't like, here's a point I'm making and here's the corresponding data I have to back it up, or it was a lot of like, and maybe I'm forgetting one, but there wasn't a lot of that. It was a lot more like, well, if you think, he tried to make the point that, I guess we could call it a point that the Second Amendment could be read to say that everyone was required to own a firearm for the defense of the government or something like that. And I remember saying, I was like, I don't know anyone who has interpreted that way ever at all. And then I started reading from the people who had actually helped craft the Constitution and the Second Amendment, what they had to say about it. And obviously it wasn't that, but yeah, I don't recall. Maybe if you watched it, maybe you'll remember a point he made, but I don't recall there being a lot in the way of actual points being made.
Well, instead of doing that, let me throw this at you. Sure. So recently, in light of the shooting of the United Health CEO and then the debate on U.S. healthcare, and the U.S. spends so much more than every other country on healthcare. And look, we've only got, we're ranked 42nd in life expectancy. So one of the main rebuttals to that has been to say, look, if you control for obesity and car accidents and shootings, Americans, life expectancy is a lot higher, for a given demographic and blah, blah. If you start controlling for all sorts of other things that are, seem like fair comparison. And so it's hey, if you get a gun, some gang member shoots you, or you get into a car accident, it's not the fault of the U.S. healthcare system that it can't keep you alive, and so that
Right,
we're
right.
being unfairly penalized because of those other things. And so I would say, I've had this conversation like 3 or 4 times on podcasts the last couple of weeks, and then I would always just say, now in fairness, the progressive could say, right, that's why we need gun control, but hey, that's a separate discussion. So I guess I would
Right.
say that to you now. So if you think, if number one, do you agree that that's a decent thing to say about, the critique? This is why the U.S. healthcare system's awful, and clearly capitalism doesn't work when it comes to medicine, to point out those confounding factors. But then doesn't that kind of raise the question, all right, so isn't it a bit awkward for libertarians that the U.S. does have a lot more gun deaths than other advanced countries? And why is that?
So one thing I want to break down when it comes to, I'll start with the healthcare thing. So if you just removed certificate of need laws, which are, I don't know if you know what that is, but a certificate of need law is essentially, in most states, they have something in place which was based on a completely debunked economic theory from the 50s, that the reason that the cost of healthcare was going up and that the reason that the cost of things were going up was because companies were investing too much money in new devices and new things, and that it was driving up their costs. We, of course, now know that's ridiculous, but that was a theory. And so that they said, we're going to artificially restrict the supply, which, of course, will then make costs go down. And even though that was debunked a long time ago, there's now in many states where if you want to open a new hospital, or even expand a hospital, or a new ER, or a new add a MRI machine to your existing facility, you have to get a certificate of need approved, which usually involves having to get the other competitors in your area to say that there's a need for that. And so it's artificially restricting supply. If you got rid of cost plus legislation that just encourages the provider to purchase their products from the people that charge the highest wholesale price, because they're only allowed to charge a certain percentage more than that, which is how we ended up with the $500 aspirin and all that stuff. If you get rid of the red tape that was built around a so-called comprehensive insurance program that was made to get around FDR's threatened wage caps during World War II to stop war profiteering, if you get rid of those types of things, all of which are as a result of bad central planning that would have been removed a long time ago if it wasn't the government that had implemented it, we would have healthcare would be a lot more affordable. And that's just a handful of things that I've named. So I think it has far more to do with that than with well, it's certainly not because a single health insurance CEO was worth a few $1 million or whatever, or hundreds of millions, whatever. That's not the problem. And as you notice, healthcare didn't suddenly become affordable because he got shot. Our healthcare system is a multi-trillion-dollar decades-old web of just really bad incentive structures, and it takes the not sexy work of breaking down what those are and figuring out what to either replace or just eliminate entirely to get healthcare down to a reasonable level. I think things like obesity in the U.S. especially can be directly traced to a combination of just the fact that we're wealthy, so we have sedentary lifestyles, access to as much food as we want, and also the fact that we now know about all the things that big agriculture and big pharma did to promote the certain lifestyle activities and foods and things like that are contributing to obesity. So, I mean, again, a lot of things you can point to government being the problem, and it certainly isn't an argument for government to be even more involved in healthcare. When it comes to the gun control versus gun deaths thing, I actually talked about that a lot in the debate. Gun deaths are broken down into, I believe, 5 categories. I'm trying to remember now. Murder, suicide, justified homicides, police shootings, and accidents. So murder has been on a really slow, decades-long decline in the U.S. since like the 1970s. And there's actually theories that the reason it went up so much was because of the amount of lead in the air, and it was actually reducing people's IQs. There's all sorts of theories as to why, but the bottom line is, for like the last 50 plus years, with a couple of small blips upward during this time, 2024, last I heard, was shaping to be one of the safest year in over 100 years when it came specifically to murder. So that's been declining. If gun ownership rates equaled murder rates, the murder rate would continue to skyrocket because gun ownership rates we now have crossed the guns per people threshold in all 50 states. Like nationwide, there are more guns than people. The accident rate has plummeted by 90% in the last 50 years. Even though during that time we have fewer restrictions in place, there's fewer licensing requirements, there's fewer training requirements. South Carolina just got rid of theirs. We now have completely constitutional open and concealed carry, and yet the accident rate continues to drop, proving that the government had nothing to do with that. Guns are just being made safer now, and there's more just general understanding about gun safety than there used to be. Police shootings have been on a relatively steady decline for a variety of reasons. Justified homicides have also been on a relative, they kind of go with the homicides, right? You figure if the crime rate is X, then you're going to have a certain number of homicides and a certain number of murders and a certain number of justified homicides. So every type of thing, when we would think of gun deaths, we would think of murder. And all 4 of the 5 types of gun deaths have been continuing to drop slowly over time, with the exception of accidents, which has just plummeted. The one that's gone up is suicides, which means this isn't a gun problem, it's a suicide problem. And it is a very, very, I think, an incredibly cynical thing to do, to lump a person who, for whatever reason, decided they couldn't take this anymore and they ended their life, and lump them in with, a mass murderer or a gang member who killed a bunch of people on the street. Because when you say gun violence, when David Hogg or any gun control advocate, when they say gun violence, they know what pops into people's heads: school shootings and gang violence and, getting murdered and all that. Like, that's what people think of. But they know, or they should know, that what people actually consider gun violence has been dropping for many, many years. But that's not a compelling argument. Well, yes, this has been dropping, but guns are still scary and I feel safer in Europe. That's not a compelling argument. But if you can lump the suicides in and say gun violence is rising, then that's, that's a more compelling argument. Gun violence, what we would actually consider gun violence, is not rising. Suicides are rising, which means we need to look at why suicides are happening. And things like red flag laws, any of the things they tried to implement to drop homicides, not only did they not drop homicides, they didn't drop suicides either. So that's not, we're not going to stop suicides with gun control any more than we're going to stop murders with gun control.
Okay. Well, I might be contributing to the problem then. I should go look that up. I mean, I know it's a true statement that, if you strip out gun deaths and blah, 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 then the U.S. does better, vis-a-vis Europe or something. But I'm just saying, when I try to illustrate that, like, I think I even might have just said it to you, like, I would say, right, so it's not the healthcare system fault if there's gangland shootings. And so I might be leading the listener to believe that, the U.S. does have a lot more people dropping dead from gunshots, and it's from, gang violence and school shooters. When
it's not the healthcare, it's all the people shooting each other is why we're dying. No, and you're right. And the thing is, like, in general, health outcomes in the U.S. are at or amongst, like, if you look at any of, like, the, expected survival rates for different types of diseases or whatever, we're at or in the top, few, sometimes number 1 with a bullet, and sometimes in the top 3 or 4 of all of those things. American healthcare is about the best healthcare that money can buy. The problem is it's wildly expensive. Some of that is because things in general in the U.S. are, on the balance, more expensive than in most other countries, but that's not the real reason. We have a ridiculous web of ridiculous perverse incentives that have been building up for almost 100 years now, and every proposed fix just fed more into the actual problem, which is that healthcare decisions are increasingly being collectivized and made at a centrally planned level, and instead of it being up to the doctor and the patient figuring this out, and the providers being able to innovate in the market to be able to provide the best services in the most cost-effective manner. That's often being, like, literally not allowed or just greatly restricted. That's the problem with healthcare.
Yeah, I just interviewed Dr. Keith Smith, one of the founders of the Surgery Center of Oklahoma, and was talking about this stuff. Yep. And he kind of agreed with what you just said there, that he said, especially for, like, pediatric intensive care and stuff like that, the U.S., a handful of hospitals in the U.S. are hands down the best in the world. That, some rich couple that's got a baby that really needs intensive care, would want to come to the U.S. and have it done in a few of our key hospitals, whatever.
Yeah, I have multiple sclerosis. I am very, very grateful that I'm here. Even in many of the other first world countries, I'm in these groups where people with MS talk about their different issues and stuff like that. And I hear people talk about how they've been trying to get an MRI for years. And it's not, they're not in like Slovakia or something like that. They're in like Germany or Italy or Canada. Like it's not, some like what you would expect a country where there's only one MRI machine in the whole country or whatever. It's countries that are a lot wealthier that have 3 MRI machines in the whole country. And it's because the care is entirely rationed because it is, government run healthcare. So, our healthcare system is the worst, except for all the others.
All right, new topic. You were the Libertarian vice presidential candidate in the 2020 election?
Yes. Yep.
And so the top of the ticket was Joe Jorgensen.
Joe Jorgensen.
How did you how'd that happen? Like what made you run, and and tell us whatever you want to share about that experience, that segment of your life.
Yeah, that was arguably the most interesting thing I've ever done. It certainly was up there. I
think renaming yourself after My Little Ponies is kind of downhill from that.
In retrospect, maybe. In retrospect, yeah. At the time, it felt right. It just felt natural. But but I was 3. So when I ran I started running for the nomination. So the Libertarian Party, we don't do the where we pick our presidential candidate and then our presidential candidate says who the running mate's going to be. We pick their 2 separate races. And so I decided to run for the vice presidential nomination in 2019. My running mate was my proposed running mate. So we were running together, even though you could pick one and not pick the other, which is ultimately what the delegate showed. That was Vermin Supreme. Yes. And so he's got a boot on his head. I mostly talked about, I was kind of the straight man to Vermin Supreme, but I would also talk about kind of silly stuff here and there. But then he was like the 90% silly, 10% serious. I was the 90% serious, 10% silly. So it was a good complementing factor there. But, the guy's got a boot on his head. Right. And is promising, free ponies, and he's going to put you in a camp if you don't brush your teeth, and it was that kind of thing. And so when I ran for the nomination, the main purpose of it was to it was almost like an internal.
Wait a minute, he was going to have a free pony, and you were his. Okay, now that all makes sense.
Oh no, trust me, there was all sorts of attempted lure there that I would not allow to happen. But I made a point of saying we're not doing that. Yes, see, you made the connection.
Yes.
So when I did that, I did not think I was going to get the nomination. I didn't even think I was ever going to be seriously considered for the nomination because my running mate was the Vermin Supreme. Yeah. And so I thought my point was to kind of do something that was fun and silly that would kind of disarm people and get and when I say people, I mean like the delegates of the party. I thought I was going to be talking to hundreds of people with this message. And because for many years, my background is in, I'm a serial entrepreneur. I started my first company when I was 16. And that's the world I came from. And I retired from all that when I was diagnosed with MS so I could focus on my health. But then once I started feeling better in 2018, 19, I thought, all right, well, now what am I going to do? And I thought, well, I like spreading the libertarian message. And by that, I mean small L libertarian, our philosophy and our ideas. But I often see it's just done very poorly. And one of the places it's done most poorly is in the Libertarian Party. And so I went into it. I actually joined it right before I announced my run. And I said, here are some ways we could actually effectively talk about libertarianism. And so some of the serious things I did were door knocking tours with local affiliates, going through different types of neighborhoods and just sharing our message, listening to what they had to say. And so I was kind of giving these as points of these are things we could be doing that are a lot more effective than getting angry at everyone that they don't want to take this massive chance on voting third party, which is what it is in a 2-party system, and especially in a close election. And apparently, I sold my my points very well because then they actually nominated me, and it wasn't until I don't know 2-3 weeks before the actual contest happened, and I'm getting back people are doing informal whip counts of the delegates, and they're like, yeah, you've got this thing, probably third ballot, which is what happened. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then when Joe Jorgensen got the presidential nomination, I thought, Well, yeah, I don't think they're going to pick me now because they're clearly wanting to do something a little more, I guess, traditional or conventional. And then no, they picked me right to go along with her. And no one was more not happy about that than Joe.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, no, she was not happy. So Joe asked at the convention. So Gary Johnson, when he got the nomination in 2016, he was like, I will only run. He basically said, I will only run if Bill Weld is my running mate. That's how he beat Larry Sharpe for the vice presidential nomination. Otherwise, it would have been Gary Larry 2016. In 2020, Joe said she wouldn't come flat out and say, I'm not going to run if it's Spike. But she basically just said, I'd really prefer for it to be John Mons, who was another guy who was running for the VP nomination. Great guy. If he had gotten it, he would have done great too. But they ended up still picking me, which I think was their way of saying to Joe, look, you were our compromise candidate. Spike wasn't. Whatever message was being sent there, she didn't like that. And she definitely didn't like me. So you'll notice during the campaign early on, there were like a couple times we did like stuff like this where we would do a live stream together. She was in Greenville. I was down here in Myrtle Beach and we would do a Q&A thing together. And then that was about the end of that. Then the next time that you would see the two of us in the same area or on the same thing was at the election night party. She did not want to do events where I was anywhere near her. She did not like the way that I was talking about stuff. I don't know that she actually knew what I was saying, but she was, at least by the people that were telling her what I was doing, she didn't like it. But I think it was more she just didn't like me. So yeah, she was not on the Spike train, put it that way.
I was going to say, because you've toned things down or something, but I always thought you were like completely. I couldn't imagine someone not liking you in terms of like libertarian outreach. Were you doing? Was it just because you were paired with Vernon Supreme, and so this guy's just screwing around, and I'm seriously trying to help this country? Was it?
I would imagine that's part of it. Was that she just really didn't like what Vermin was doing, and so she like completely associated me with that. Not just that I had been in that, but that's who I was too. Like I was going to start putting a boot on my head. I think it was that, a combination of that. I also think she just really didn't like that the delegates. Like it took her 4 or 5 rounds for her to win because it was a very contentious thing who the nominee was going to be. Nothing like this year, but it was relatively contentious. Like there wasn't a clear favorite going in 2020, and she ended up winning, to her credit. Whereas by the time the actual nomination days rolled around, it was going to be me. Like a good number of people had already pretty much settled on, I'm voting for Spike first, or this is my first guy, but I'm going for Spike next. I mean, I had multiple presidential candidates saying they wanted me to be their VP candidate. So I think that might also be it. Like maybe she was upset that I was, I don't know, better liked by the delegates. I'm honestly, it's all conjecture. I don't know. Because I've only talked with Joe like I think 6 times in my life. So I don't really, she does it. I don't know. Now the benefit of that for me was that during the campaign, when she started saying a lot of the stuff that she did, it was much easier for me to, I guess, distance myself from that, even though I was literally her running mate, than it would have been if we had been like most running mates where you're kind of, like literally running mates where you're at most events or a good number of events together and you're referencing each other constantly and stuff. I would show up. I would say what Trump was in the middle of doing, letting Anthony Fauci run the country, how terrible Joe Biden would be, how he was the architect of most of the things that we all hate in government. And that Joe Jorgensen wasn't any of that, was basically what I would say. And I did it to the best of my ability. I can tell you this. I never trash talked Joe. I never I tried. I think there were a couple times I wish I had been clear in saying, listen, I don't agree with that. But I would just say something else instead. When she did the whole what was it? Yeah, actively we can't just be passively anti-racist. We must be actively anti-racist. I instead was just I'm like, well, the discussion here should be about why are people out in the streets angry? They're angry because of unaccountable police officers. Well, why are they mad about why are there unaccountable police officers? Qualified immunity, the war on drugs, blah, blah, blah. Let's talk about that. So I would just try to
Yeah.
do the opposite or do my version of talking about a thing instead of like just saying what she said was bad or stupid or whatever. So
Yeah.
I did my best.
Okay. Thanks for that. That's interesting. Yeah, for what it's worth, I wasn't paying too much attention to the LP at the time, but the people that were really up in arms about, I can't believe, did you see what, Jorgensen said today? And usually people would say, I mean, Spike is cool. Like, I love what he's doing, but I mean, Jesus, Joe Jorgensen, I can't believe this pick, our cannon's doing this. And then of course, since I got you here and we're talking about it, do you have any thoughts on, the direction the LP went, that, the so-called takeover was a direct response to people who are unhappy with Joe Jorgensen's campaign? And now some are saying, oh my gosh, it was all a, Republican Trojan horse, or no, we're actually getting something done. We're getting some traction. And a lot of people can't handle that. Anyway, what's your thoughts on all that stuff?
I mean, so first of all, both could be true, but I'll go back a little bit further. The Mises Caucus in earnest was a reaction to Bill Weld. And I guess to a lesser extent, Gary Johnson, but it was really like, that was the thing where it was like, okay, like enough of this. And what's funny is on the left side of the Libertarian Party, that's what led to like bringing Vermin Supreme in. Like those were both kind of both, I guess, the leftists within the LP and the right wingers within the LP, their respective responses to Bill Weld. It was like everyone agreed that was just that was a bridge too far. I couldn't vote for Gary because of that. Like it was like Bill Weld is arguably worse than just about everyone else in the two-party system except for Hillary herself. Like he's here defending Hillary, who he has a long-term working relationship with. Like this is what happened. Like how was this? This was like I would say, even though it was the most votes we got in terms of like the purpose for the party, arguably the lowest point. Like what are we doing here? If we're raising $15 million or 10 million, whatever it was, for Bill Weld to run, why do this? Like, why do this with the brand Libertarian? Why not do that with the brand, I don't know, Republican Retirement Center or something like that? I don't know what that was. But so the Mises Caucus came from that, and I've heard the accusations that this was all just a that this was all just a con job to get the Republican Party. To keep the LP at bay and to use their leverage them to support the Republican Party. And then I've heard others say, well, no, it's the LP responding to decades of irrelevance and trying to actually have a say in how governments run. It could actually be both of those things. I don't know. It might be neither of those things. I tend to think it's people trying their best to try to do something, and with certain levels of success and failure on both sides. I will tell you this, whatever it turns out to be, and we don't know yet, like it'll be a while before we see whatever this plan was and what its direction was and what its purpose was, if it actually ended up working. Does a lot of libertarian and libertarian friendly policy happen under a Trump administration? I'd love to see hopefully Ross Ulbricht is free. Hopefully Roger Ver is free. But it can't just be that. Like, that's not libertarian policy. That's two good things happening to two people that didn't deserve what was done to them. It remains to be seen, like, long-term, what the results are going to be. I don't know. I will say that over the last 2 years, I've been less and less keen to spend my time focused on political parties and candidates and campaigns, and more focused on spending my time on finding effective ways to distill, spread, and get people to act upon libertarian ideas. And that's why I started You Are the Power. It started in earnest immediately after the 2020 campaign.
Can I stop you just for a second?
Yeah,
Spike?
yeah.
We're at the official time I originally told you. Can we go over a little bit?
Yeah. Let's
okay. Yeah, I just want to make sure I wasn't making you miss something. Okay, yeah.
No, we're good. We're good.
Yep. So go ahead.
Yeah,
you founded You Are the Power.
Yeah. So You Are the Power started in earnest after the campaign did. We officially launched in 2020, or 2022, and we just continue to grow and expand. And we have distilled we are taking a distilled message of libertarianism, which is what we call the principle of human respect. We are finding causes and examples of people and families and small businesses who are being destroyed by out of control local and state level government officials who are abusing their authority, or in some cases just using their authority, and it leads to abusive outcomes. And instead of just pointing this thing out and saying this is the result of this policy, and so you should be against it, or saying this is a result of this policy, and so you should vote against them or vote for this candidate instead. Instead, what we're doing is saying we're distilling it down further and saying, yeah, this person's mayor, this person's sheriff, this person's city council, whatever, they're just people, and they're doing this to other people. And we'd never tolerate them doing this to other people if they didn't have that title next to their name. But they're still the same person, whether or not they have that title. By the way, here's their phone number, here's their email address, here's their social media, here's a template of wording you can use when you contact them to tell them what you think about what they're doing. And we're going to keep applying pressure to them until they back off and do the right thing. And that's what we do. And when we started it, we were like, hey, let's see if this works. We've had like over 90% success rate.
Can you that's amazing. Are there any like one or two stories you can share,
sure,
just so people get an idea of like what was going on and then what you guys got put a stop to?
Yeah, so I can tell you two from this year. One is a lady named Rebecca Massey, spelled the same way as Thomas Massey. I don't think they're related, but in Surprise, Arizona, she had been she saw some wonky stuff happening with their budget, the city budget. Mm-hmm. And she noticed a lot of people getting pay raises, and it wasn't being brought up in meetings or something like that. So she kept applying for FOIA requests. She kept requesting them, and they kept getting denied for very dumb reasons. And so she actually showed up to a city council meeting to call out the city council and the mayor and say, hey, you should be volunteering this information to tell us why you're giving all these pay raises to people. And they responded by saying, you're not allowed to mention us or our names at the city council meeting. And she said, that's patently unconstitutional. You can't tell me what I can and can't say. I'm allowed to, and I can actually tell you the court decisions that say that I can say whatever I want to say if you'd like. And they just kept saying, yeah, that's your opinion, but you can't say anything. So they ended up having her arrested because she continued to talk. Mm-hmm. And they arrested her in front of her minor daughter, who they left at the building at night alone. And anyway, so we found out about it. We put the video of her getting arrested out there. We led the charge on saying, here's the information for the mayor and the council and the chief of police and so forth. And they dropped the charges. And she's now continuing to fight for accountability and transparency there in the city. That's one of the more recent ones. Here's one that's a lot more visceral, at least to me. And we've had a few of these cases because it turns out this is a widespread problem. There's a family called the Hernandez family. The Hernandez family, Matt and Tucky Hernandez, they took their baby daughter to a hospital because she was having some swelling and she was fussy. And so the hospital did an X-ray and some blood work, and they found the X-ray and the blood work suggested that she was dealing with some kind of a health issue, either neonatal rickets or osteogenesis imperfecta or a couple of other possible things. But the bottom line was it was obvious that something was wrong with her, like on a systemic level. But mm-hmm. One of the things that the X-ray found was some minor fractures. And so the child abuse pediatrician, despite all the evidence there, said that she was being abused, that the baby was being abused. And based on that, with no investigation, the police took both of their children from them and arrested the father. And part of his bail condition was that he wasn't allowed to live with or communicate with or be within a certain number of feet of his wife. So overnight, this husband and wife, mother and father, were separated from their children indefinitely and not allowed to live together. And they fought separately. They fought hard to get their kids' medical records. They got the records. They went, oh, good. This is all a big misunderstanding. They went to the court, and the family court judge refused to listen to the evidence or admit the testimony of their experts that they hired. They spent a lot of money doing this and wouldn't allow any of it to be admitted, and instead took as the only evidence a child abuse pediatrician who wasn't even the one that had examined their baby and who said when you look at these kinds of fractures, statistically, they tend to be caused by abuse. And when one of the attorneys asked him to cite the source of his statistic, he said, "Yeah, you can look that up on the internet. It's on there. It's pretty statistical." And that was the only thing that the judge would hear. And she decided to order non-reunification and basically not allow them to see their children. And so we found out about this. We jumped on it as soon as we made sure this was legit. We knew all the details. There wasn't something there we didn't know. We jumped on it, and two things happened. Number one, all the officials involved started backing off inexplicably as thousands of people were angrily telling them to back off. And the other thing that happened was a bunch of other families came out of the woodwork from across the country, especially a lot there in Georgia, saying that's exactly what is happening to us. And so now we have, not just with the Hernandez family, but with many other families, the Savely family, the Collins family, I'm blanking on names right now, over a dozen at this point. I'm going to feel silly afterwards because I can't remember any of the names. Savely family, Collins family, the Clark family, and many others. We have gotten families reunited. We have gotten charges dropped. And we've also gotten a lot of state legislators to listen in on what's happening in their state, so we can hopefully get actual model legislation to fix the perverse federal and state funding practices that are subsidizing and actually encouraging these officials to call cases abuse when they aren't. And those are just two of many examples of what we do at You Are the Power, but they all boil down to the same thing. We find people who are public people in government who are using their authority to harm other people, and we tell the public about it. And instead of just getting them mad about it, we give them an immediate call to action to actually do something about it. And then we do that over and over and over again. And we keep doing it until we win. And then we go on to the next one and we win on that one. And we go on to the next one and we win on that one. And we're building a culture of actually winning instead of just being upset about stuff. Mm-hmm. And actually finding things that are wrong and fixing it by applying public pressure. And in doing so, we're constantly driving home the underlying message. This stops happening when we demand that we be respected as individual human beings and be treated like human beings instead of like a funding opportunity or a political obstacle. And it's been wildly successful so far.
Okay, well, that's great. I mean, I both in personal experience with some people I know in situations that I know about, and just in general, that's an area where it's kind of like a standard thing about, geez, a libertarian world, what happens with child abuse? And then, the one rebuttal to that or answer is to say, why are you assuming that, the government does everything else but poorly, giving them the power to take kids away from people? If they get that wrong, that's pretty, that's worse than taking my income.
Yeah. In a libertarian world, we wouldn't be telling these departments, we'll give you extra money as long as you call it abuse, with no follow-up to see if it's actually abuse or not. You just have to stamp abuse on their case at the beginning, and then you get all this extra money, and that money continues to go all the way down the pipeline. So you give them, they get extra federal money, and so what's happened now is many states have harmonized their funding to match that of the Social Security Administration, where they will also only give you extra money if you call it abuse. Otherwise, you get bare bones funding that barely keeps the lights on. And so you get more money if you call it abuse. You get even more money if a non-reunification is ordered and they're put into foster care. You get even more money if they are permanently severed from their innocent parents and placed in an adoptive home. And then you get even more money if it turns out they have a chronic health issue. So when a child abuse pediatrician first sees this chronically ill child, this child that has either because of complications due to birth or Ehlers-Danlos syndrome or neonatal rickets or a host of other things that cause bruising and swelling and fractures, and all of the blood work results that would back that up, when they see that kid that they know is sick, instead of saying, man, we need to treat this child because they're sick, instead they go, cha-ching, this is the maximum amount of money we can get. It's a sick child that we can blame on abuse and steal from its parents. And it's child trafficking. And again, that wouldn't happen if that child abuse pediatrician saw that child as a human being. It's happening because instead they're seeing them as a funding opportunity. And so it's libertarianism. We very often get caught up in government bad. Well, yes, government bad, but why government bad? Government bad, not because the specific people that are part of government are bad. It's because of the structure that provides a bunch of perverse funding incentives and just perverse incentives in general that actually discourage fixing a problem and encourage allowing the problem to get worse, or sometimes actively making the problem worse, because they get even more money and even more personnel and even more everything that they want if things get worse. And so it's like government is basically the worst possible way to organize human beings to do something. That's the problem. You could take the biggest angels you ever find, put them in the government, and inevitably they're going to do poorly in that role, because that's what government is. It is a way for people to do things poorly.
And also another element in all that stuff is when all that power is concentrated in the hands of a few people, even if in the beginning, maybe that pediatrician really did earnestly believe that, but then it's hard. You back them into a corner. It's hard for them to admit they were wrong, because then it's like, oh yeah, we took that kid away from those parents and let the dad and the mom force them apart, and we were wrong. Like, they don't want to admit that, and so like your subconscious, you psychologically protect yourself from that by saying, no, we were right, and digging your heels in. So there's that kind of element too. It can be more nuanced, but still, those kind of people having that much power, and then without your organization, the individual parents, what the heck are they supposed to do against this machine?
Yeah, and there's also the CYA phenomenon, right? So like, if I'm a child abuse pediatrician, and I know that if I have a kid in front of me who has swelling and fractures and a vitamin D deficiency and a host of other things that would at least indicate an actual like medical problem, I got one of two choices. I can either call this case, say that this case is not abuse, that this is, because a child abuse pediatrician, literally all they do is say whether or not it's abuse. So I would go, no, this isn't abuse. The rest of you doctors deal with whatever this thing is. And then if it turns out it was being abused or neglected, that falls back on me. I get less money because I didn't call it abuse. I might get fired or demoted or given fewer roles as a CAP because I was wrong that one time and it turned out they were being abused, right? Whereas if every single time that there's any there's anything that I could use to justify calling it abuse, I do that. I never have to worry about anyone saying, hey, that was abuse and you didn't call it, because I'm calling everything abuse. And so I'm going in and I'm calling everything abuse. I'm getting more money than anyone else. And I kick the can down the road and hope that the next person actually does their job. And that's the same calculation that every single person on the pipeline is making. The caseworker supervisor, the investigating officer, the family court judge, the foster parents, very often, many times the foster parents when they come. In fact, we found out from the Hernandez family, from a temporary foster family who contacted DFACS, that's what they call CPS in Georgia, and said, something's wrong here. I don't think these kids were abused. I think this kid is ill. And the state's response is, we won't need your services anymore. And so there's this disincentive to do the right thing. And yeah, that's why we exist, because I'm not here just to go, you should be mad at the government for doing this. I'm here to get, we put out absolute tearjerker stories. By the time you're finished watching one of our videos about any of these causes, you are on fire to do something about it. But if I just leave you there and go, so anyway, that's why government bad, then you're like, okay, yeah, government bad. I'm angry. Now what do I do? And that's when people, this one was a Democrat. I'm now a Republican, or the governor of that state's a Republican. I'm now a Democrat. Instead, I don't care how you vote. Here are the people that did it. Here are their phone numbers. Here are their email addresses. Here's their social media. Come join us in telling them what we think about this and what we think they should do instead. And we go all the way through. The pediatrician, everyone involved is a human being with a phone number and an email address and the social media place that you can reach them on social media. And we just let them know, like, hey, this is wrong. Do the right thing. And then when they do back off and do the right thing, we thank them for that. Like, we're not. This isn't just about being vindictive. It's about, hey, this is wrong, so do the right thing. And so it's corrective on a temporary level. But we're not just playing government whack-a-mole where, we find cases of abuse and then 5 more pop up here. We're also building a movement that can eventually take on even bigger things and even more things as well. And we're also getting the attention of people in government, legislators and other people who are like, is there a way we can fix this so this doesn't happen? And we go, yeah, there absolutely is. And so then we work on that. So it's about creating a movement of winning that focuses on finding goals that we can actually attain and finding a winning message that gets people to join us in doing this, and let them figure out their ideology along the way. Most of the people that are on this journey with us now, I'm not sure many of them would even call themselves libertarians. I don't care. Many of them, without even considering themselves libertarian, are far more effective in libertarian activism by being involved with You Are the Power than a good number of some of the most pure libertarians you've ever met who do absolutely nothing to actually spread that message and to actually act upon that message. So I'm about getting people to act upon a winning message, to grow a movement around that, and to move ahead on that instead of waiting for everyone to academically and intellectually adopt our positions and then we can start acting upon it. That's never going to happen.
Do you think they're vermin supremacists?
Some might be. Yeah. I
So,
don't know.
joking aside, for people who got fired up at what we just said, that where do they go? Like, is there a website or something for people who want to like see more of what you're doing, and how do they get involved?
Yes, Bob, actually there is. If you go to youarethepower.net, you can sign up today. We'd love to have you become a member. When you become a member, you get hooked up with your local and regional organizers for your state and for your region, so that you can be actively involved. You get access to our members only app where you find out before anyone else about our causes. So you can be the first ones to be out there cyberbullying the government and helping win hearts and minds for liberty along the way. You'll get access to our members only social media groups. You get access to a members only email newsletter that we put out, and many other cool things that we're doing. If you're in a position to be able to give, every dollar that you give helps us move us forward. We spend upwards of 60 hours on every cause, just vetting it before we do the very first, lift our first finger of actually taking action on it, because we want to make sure they're legit. So there's a lot of costs involved in this. So if you're in a position to be able to give, we'd certainly appreciate that. And not only that, since you're asking, Bob, I know you didn't ask about this part, but since you are asking, we actually have a very generous donor who is matching dollar for dollar any donation we receive through the end of the year. So if you decide you'd like to give to You Are the Power, not only can you deduct it from your taxes, you can take that money from the government, from your wallet, and instead of giving it to the government, you can give it to us instead. And not only will it be spent on a great cause, but to us, it'll be worth double whatever you gave to us.
You can take it from that donor's wallet too.
Yes.
You take it and then give it to you guys. So that's good.
Yes, take it
with
from
the consent.
Take it from the donor's wallet. You're taking you're doubling. It's like when you vote Libertarian, you're also voting Republican and Democrat according to the Democrats and Republicans. If you in a similar, not really true, except in this case it's actually true. You're taking money from someone else's wallet voluntarily, and taking from your own wallet voluntarily, taking it out of the jaws of government, putting it in our jaws instead. I'll work on that part. And doing good and helping spread liberty.
Well, that's great. I know we're over time here. I did want to give you a chance if you still have stamina.
I'm good.
Okay,
I'm good.
Can you tweeted this out, so I'm not prying here. About your religious inclinations and how you kind of had an epiphany or a breakthrough or however you want to talk about. So anyway, just can you share that with us?
Yeah, so I it was kind of the epiphany was a very long one coming, but I announced a couple weeks ago now that I had become born again, basically, that I had accepted Jesus as my Lord and Savior, repented of my sins, that I was now regularly attending church, studying the Bible, praying, actively seeking out sin in my life so I can turn away from it, and all the things that we're supposed to be doing as Christians. And it was an announcement that I had been holding off from making for at least a week or so, because very uncharacteristically of me, I was filled with all these, it's weird. I was like, I was very worried that I was going to misrepresent something about Scripture or about Christianity because I'm so early into it. And I just didn't want to be one of these people that jumps into something and starts telling everyone and everything I'm saying is wrong, or scripturally unsound or whatever. And so I kind of held off. And I also wanted to make sure I was doing it for the right reasons, that I wasn't just saying, hey, everyone, look at me. Hey,
Right.
Spike Cohen. Yeah, I'm a Spike Cohen. Look at me. Because it's the opposite of that. I want less of me and more of God. Like it's that I would like, if anything, for myself to shrink away from it and for God to be talked about more. And so I actually shied away from saying it. And then I just felt like sharing the Mark 29:24 prayer, Lord, I believe, help me my unbelief. And then I started to explain, like in the reply, explain like what not Mark 9:24 meant to me. And before I knew it, I was literally just typing out my statement of faith. And I went, all right, well then I guess it's time to do it, because this is not what I intended to write. And so I pressed send, and there it was. So now everyone knows.
Well, great. Is it, was that something? Well, I guess for one thing, at least according to the Wikipedia, your father was Jewish and you were raised as, like in the Messianic Jewish. Anyway, can you just explain a little bit about like,
Yeah.
like,
yeah.
was
So
this coming out of left
raised,
field, and were, people who knew you, would they be surprised, or was this like a return to your upbringing?
A good number of my loved ones would be surprised that I wasn't this all along, because I have been, I spent a long time lying to myself and trying to tell myself I believed when I didn't. And then I spent a few of the last years just like not believing and not really telling many people that I didn't believe. So this was kind of me going like, yeah, actually I didn't, but I do now. But so, yeah, I grew up a Messianic Jew. I was raised a Messianic Jew. And for those who don't know, a Messianic Jew is a Jew who believes that Christ was Messiah. That's pretty much it. It is both a Jew and a Christian. And the vast majority of Jews, not only obviously don't believe that Christ was Messiah, they don't consider us Jews. They consider us Christians. Fine, whatever. So, when you're a child and your parents and your closest loved ones are all telling you this thing, you believe it because you're a child, and because these are the people who you love and trust more than anyone else. So, that my parents tell me that the Bible is real and these stories are true, and Jesus was God brought in flesh to die for our sins. Okay, that's great. Wow, that's awesome that he would die for my sins so that I could, live in eternity next to him. And you just believe that. And as I got older, and I mean older as in like early teens even, I just questioned it more and more. And I just didn't believe. Like the more I examined it, the more I'm like, I don't actually believe this. I don't think these stories are true. I don't think this is true. And I didn't want to disappoint my parents. I didn't want to, be the atheist, because I did not want to be associated with atheism or atheists for a variety of reasons. And so I was just like, okay, if I just keep telling myself I believe and keep making myself believe and keep trying to discover the thing that's going to make me intellectually adopt this and believe it, then I'll be good. I'll just keep telling myself that and keep lying to myself. And it turns out that doesn't work. You can't just keep lying to yourself. And I mean, when I say I was lying to myself, I was lying to myself. I went to church. I went and found a nice Christian woman to settle down with. Thank God that turned out very well. But I found a Christian, very devout Christian woman to be my wife, and got married in a church by a pastor, by our pastor. And I'm doing the whole Christian thing, and deep down I'm like, I don't believe this, and I just kept lying. And then at some point, shortly after I was diagnosed with MS, and I was kind of re-examining everything in my life, things I was doing that just didn't make sense. And then I came up like, why am I lying? Like, if this is true, not only am I not a believer, but I'm also lying, which is a sin. So it's not like it's not like God's happy that I'm lying.
Right.
And I also don't believe this. So why am I pretending to? And so I actually told Tasha and not many more people that I didn't actually believe. And Tasha's response was, I'm going to pray for you. And she did. She prayed every single day for me and continues to do so. And so I was never hostile to the faith. I was never hostile to the belief. I actually wanted it. I just didn't. And so I had kind of made peace with saying, you know what? This thing, there's clearly some kind of creator. We don't have an uncaring universe that out of nowhere created a bunch of things that care, like that. We are the fruit of a tree and that tree cares, or else we wouldn't. So clearly, like, there's something there, but it's probably just so incomprehensible that us trying to figure it out is no different than like our gut microbiome trying to figure it all out. Like, we don't have the cognitive or perceptual capacity to see or understand any of this stuff. And but I do know that our life is rare and fleeting, and that impossibly so on both counts. And the only logical response to getting a gift that is like winning the Powerball lottery 1 trillion times over, in terms of how unlikely it is for it to ever happen, and something that's so fleeting and rare, is just tremendous gratitude. And the best way I can demonstrate that gratitude is the way I treat myself and others, and that's the way I can live my life. I had kind of made a sort of peace that way, and so I just kind of settled on that. And about I don't know, just over a year ago, I started like going back and forth with a friend of mine who's a pastor. His name's Tub Rorabaugh. And I just, like, I had all these questions for him, because he struck me as someone that was knowledgeable and someone who wasn't going to like, it wasn't impressed by me or whatever. He was going to just tell me how it was and tell me when I thought it was wrong or foolish or whatever. And he did. And I just kept going back and forth with him about, my disbeliefs and my questioning. And he was the only one that, up until that point, like, for example, I'd say, like, the things in the Bible just don't make any sense to me. And I think the whole thing's just incomprehensible. And he's like, all right, well, if it's incomprehensible, then why would it make sense to you? Oh, okay. And I'm like, it might just be that God can't really ever talk to us for the same reason we can't talk to our gut microbiome. There's just too much of a gap in intelligence and communication there that we can't bridge it. And he said, well, then why couldn't it be that he would come in human form to try to say it in a way that we might be able to understand part of it? But even still, we're still scratching our heads trying to figure out the finer points of what he said. Okay, all right. And so it made me say, maybe there's something plausible here. But the real breakthrough, I can thank probably a bunch of trolls on Twitter. Half of them, not all of them are trolls. But I actually, a few months ago, I posted about my problems with Pascal's wager, where I'm like, listen, if you can't just make yourself believe. Like, Pascal's wager.
Right, yeah.
If you profess faith in Jesus and you're right, then you get eternal heaven. And if you're wrong, then you were going to die anyway. It doesn't matter. And I'm like, yeah, but you have to actually believe. You can't just say, yes, I believe. I don't really believe. I'm just wagering. Like, that's not really like, but a few people responded by saying, well, there are people who didn't believe and they prayed for belief. They talked about, and people kept quoting Mark 9:24. And it was, God, I believe, Lord, I believe, help me my unbelief. And so I read about it, and I read all of Mark 9. Actually, I ended up reading Mark 9, and I'm reading through it, and I'm like, okay, so this guy, he's been watching Jesus heal people and deliver them from possession. He needs to have his son delivered from possession. And yet he still went up to God and was like, Jesus, and was like, so yeah, if you can do this, please do it. And it's like, you're seeing this happen, like, and you're hearing from other people that this is happening. This isn't like you and me hearing parables from thousands of years ago or accounts from thousands. This is happening in front of you. And for that matter, you have people like Thomas who was watching it happen and still going, I don't know what I think. So these are people who are still having disbelief. And Jesus's response was, if I can do this, I can do this for whoever believes. It'll happen for whoever who believes. And the Father's response was from Mark 9:24, is when he says, Lord, I believe, help me my unbelief. And there's a few different translations or wordings of that, but that's basically it. I do believe, help me in the part where I don't believe. In other words, like, yeah, I kind of believe and I don't believe, but I kind of do believe, or I'll say I believe, but I don't believe. And Jesus's response was to deliver his son. In other words, okay, here, you had some disbelief there. Here you go. Now you don't. And what struck me with that was, you had someone basically walking up to God and saying, I don't fully believe in this. I have a lot of doubt about this, but I'm willing to step out in faith. Is that enough? And God said, yeah. And so I talked with a few people, including Pastor Tubb, and I said, I feel like I'm ready to do that. I'm ready to say, look, I can't figure this out. I'm reading these scriptures, and to me, I'm just like, yeah, these are moral fables from the Bronze Age. I'm not saying this isn't bringing me closer to God. doing this. I'm happy to keep doing it, but that's not working. I'm not getting there through gnosis. I need to, but I am willing to just step out in faith and say, I am choosing to believe that in the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that Jesus is his son, that his form come to earth to set the law upright and to be tortured and die and become sin, go to hell, come back and die for my and deliver me of my sins if I confess my belief in him. I'm willing to say that, and I'm willing to take all of that lingering disbelief and doubt and just hand it to him and let him do whatever he wants with it. And I said, but I'm willing to do that, but I don't know that I'm willing to take the next steps that will allow me to actually be saved. And Tubb said, that is it. Like he's like, do you think I don't ever doubt some of the stuff that's in the Bible, or wonder if it was taken out of context, or, wonder if maybe it wasn't interpreted well, or wonder how God could do this, or what? You don't think that still happens? I'm like, I guess so. Yeah. But I'm still, I think I have more doubt than you. And he's like, okay. And that's true of every person. Any large group of people are going to have various levels of belief and disbelief. And I'm like, okay, but I really am still having a problem with these. Like, are you willing to have faith? I'm like, oh yeah, no, I'll do that right now. I'm willing to step out in that faith, and I'm willing to just completely suspend my disbelief indefinitely. And if he changes that to me having that intellectual belief as well, fine. And if not, fine. At this point, I want this. And he said, why do you want it? He had asked before, and I'm like, I don't know, but I do. And he said, well, then yeah, you're seeking God. And so going back to that, he's like, so you've been wanting God kind of inexplicably. Like, there's not really like a thing that's happening in your life that you're trying to find God, or a fear of anything. You just like really want this and have. And I'm like, yeah. And he's like, and you're willing to have faith? And I said, yeah. And he said, all right, well then you need to tell God that. And he's like, if you're ready to step out in faith in these things, then tell him and repent of your sins. And he's like, and then yeah, you've done the things to be quote unquote born again. And the evidence of that actually taking will be what you do after that. Do you just pat yourself on the back and go, I'm born again, and then go back to your regular life? Or are you going to continue going to church? Because I was at that point. Are you going to continue going to church and continue studying and continue praying and continue turning away from sin and continuing being the best and most, the best Christian husband to your devout Christian wife that you can be? I said, yeah, I guess so. And he said, all right, so go do it. And so that's what I did. It happened on the November the 20th. And so ever since then, I've just been leaning into the faith, and very uncharacteristically of myself, not trying to prove or disprove anything, just being faithful about it. Also uncharacteristically of me, feeling tremendously in over my head compared to other things where if I'm over my head, I either learn more about it so I'm not, or walk away from it because it wasn't that big of a deal to me. I'm instead leaning into this very odd and frightening feeling. And as I continue to do so, I continue to feel more and more convicted that I'm doing the right thing, which tells me that I'm on the right path. So that's where I am.
Well, thanks so much for sharing that. It sounds similar to my own experience in many respects. I don't know how much of my story you know, but my parents are Catholic. I went through grammar school, high school, Catholic schools, and then I had a long period of what I call devout atheism. I thought that was clever. And, because, I study science and I understand how physics works. And there's a bunch of but like you, I wasn't a jerk about it. I just kind of thought, come on, who a guy walked on water. Okay.
Yes, exactly. Yes. Yep.
But it was like, the teachings are really, I understand the social value of this. And, if my son gets, I was a Christian by the time I had a kid, but like some little kid that I cared about was lost in the woods. I'd rather a group of people from going home from church finds them than a bunch of people practicing witchcraft. That's for sure.
Right. Yeah.
But, I just I believe that. No. And then, and there was a period when when I started coming back, I called myself a Christian with a small c, was how I said it, meaning like the Christian worldview. And like, I see like the role it had played in Europe and blah, 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 and individual liberty but I don't actually believe in. And then anyway, there's a bunch of things, and that kind of, and I also, oh, okay, so God exists, but I was still like, I was reading, Buddhism and Confucius and and then
Yeah,
finally I was like,
yes,
no,
yep.
basically, it's Jesus. Like that's kind of, anyway.
So, the interesting thing is I did a lot of that too. And I would read about Taoism, and I'd listen to things about Zen Buddhism and a lot of Eastern things that intuitively made more sense to me. The idea that we're all like individual apertures of the universe experiencing itself. And then it was actually, I think it was Alan Watts that I was listening to one of his lectures, and he was talking about, and he equated it back to different things that Jesus said. So I read those things that Jesus said, and I'm like, what if God came to human form and said a bunch of stuff that even dumbing it down as much as he could for us, the way we would try to dumb something down for our gut microbiome, like, here, eat this sandwich I just ate. Even as much as he dumbed it down, we're still sitting here like, what did that mean? Could it have possibly meant? And it was it was actually, those things led me more and more back to Christ and to Jesus. And I'm sure someone watching this could say, well, yeah, you were raised in the faith, and so of course it's going to bring you back to the thing you're most comfortable with. Maybe so. I don't know. I can tell you that this does not feel comfortable. That's one thing I will tell you. Going to this and just completely leaning into faith is not even remotely comfortable. And having and understandably so, having people want to hear more about this, and me often kind of leaning on saying, I'm still learning this stuff. Or I've had people that are like, well, which denomination is right? And I'm like, man, like, don't come to me with questions about this theological stuff. I don't know. Like, I'm so early on in my journey. I'm in that, like, actively search out as many of the planks in my eye as I can see through the other ones, and try to remove those and try to be as close to what I feel like I'm capable of doing right now to give back to God and to his people, and to show myself as a worthy, as not a worthy vessel, see, this is me possibly saying unscriptural things, but trying to show myself as much of someone trying to actually demonstrate living a new life, being born again, dying, like, killing my old self to be this new self that demonstrates a faith in Christ and a gratitude for what he did. I'm focused on that. Which is why I've said to people, like, don't expect me to become a faith leader or any of that stuff, because I have a feeling I'm going to be spending a whole lot of time just like fixing me. And so I'm content to spend as much time as I need to, and again, that's probably not, I'm not fixing me. I'm doing the things that I was told in scripture to do, to demonstrate that I'm actually wanting to be a part of Christ and his church, as imperfectly and effectually as I already know it will be. I'm still trying to do it.
So at what point are you going to be baptizing people in your tighty whities? Do you know what I'm referring to?
Oh, like immediately.
Okay. Do you know what I'm talking about?
Boxers. Yeah, I do.
Okay.
And I probably pretty soon. And I will be wearing boxers. Just, it's like an aesthetic thing. I would rather go with boxers.
Do it with sheath underwear. That's for libertarians.
Oh, you're right. And I actually have a pair of porcupine sheath underwear that a member of the LNC gave me. It's a weird story.
For listeners who don't know, Russell Brand, has a conversion, and I'm not saying he's not sincere, and he was doing, and then more and more, online Christians, of course, more of the ones with sticks up their butts, like, oh, this guy's just trying to get it, whatever. But I was good. But at one point, fairly recently after his conversion experience, he was, there's photos of him baptizing people, and he's there in his tighty whities, and I thought that was kind of funny. So
yeah, and if it's real, good. I don't know if it's real. Like, it might very well be this is his newest. I don't know, his newest recreation of himself or something, or it might be completely real and legitimate. And we can all, he can be one of the faith leaders. That's fine for me. Me personally, I want to, if God chooses in his infinite wisdom, I want to be whatever. I'm right now just saying, here I am, God, here I am, Lord. you do with me what you want. And I believe, even though You Are the Power is not a religious organization, it doesn't, in and of itself, doesn't have a religion. I am doing that as part of my service to God and his people. I think a lot of people have told me that they think I was already serving God through that before I was even able to. I was being Balaam's ass without even knowing it. Like I was already doing stuff that I didn't, even know was serving God. But that's part of it. But even past that, I'm kind of just opening myself up and saying, you tell me where you want me in terms of what I believe, what I don't believe, how you want me to serve, where you think my talents lie, what my gifts are, and you put me where you want me. And so wherever that ends up being, I'm happy to do it. I will tell you, I am not seeking. I'm not seeking to make a name for myself with this. I am seeking, if anything, to give the glory to God. And whatever happens to me is whatever he wants to happen to me. And I will accept whatever that is. Whatever that ends up looking like, because I know myself, and I know that I already know what it's like to give speeches and have people run up to me afterwards and go, that was the most amazing thing ever. And I know my battle with like making sure my head doesn't get too big from that, which my wife helps a lot with. But making sure that I remember, like, yeah, you're still Spike. You're not like, this great prophetic figure. One of my fears was that now that you add, faith and God to what I'm talking about, that very quick,
right.
You can have this huge following of people, which is why I keep telling people, like, I'm not the guy. Like I'm not, I'm not going to be your prophetic messianic figure. I will occasionally talk with you about where I am on my faith journey. And if it helps you some way, I've had some people that are atheists reach out to me and ask me, how I went from the default agnostic position to the one I have now. And so if I win one soul for God, if I win one soul for Jesus, then I give all the glory to him for that. And I'm happy to serve him however he wishes me to serve. But I really just, I don't follow me. I'm not the guy. It's like Life of Brian. Follow that guy. Don't follow me.
Right. Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. That's really lifted my spirits, and I'm so glad that your wife hung in there with you and supported you through that. And it's you're very blessed. So, folks, my guest has been Spike Cohen. Spike, thanks so much for everything you've been doing, and I know you're helping those families that you mentioned, and some of our listeners may go to your website and try to contribute. So, thanks again for everything you've been doing.
Thank you, Bob. Thank you for everything that you do. You are one of my favorite follows on X. Everyone go follow Bob. Well, if you're watching this, you're probably already following Bob. But if you aren't following Bob, go follow Bob at
Bob Murphy
I don't
Econ.
remember your at.
It's
Bob Murphy Econ. Econ. E-C-O-N. And go follow him there. A combination of incredibly good takes on philosophy and economics, and like the most sarcastic humor distilled down so well that you have to know him to know it's actual sarcasm. And it's just beautiful. It's the flattest, driest sarcasm. It's like espresso of sarcasm with each tweet or post or whatever we're supposed to call it now. So go follow him. He's fantastic. If you aren't already watching this show, is this on YouTube or what's it going to be on?
YouTube.
Okay, so subscribe if you haven't already. Hit the bell so you get notified every time Bob does another episode of his show. You do not want you want your phone to literally explode with vibration and noise every time this man has dropped something else. So be sure to follow his show. Follow Bob Murphy. Thank you for having me on, man. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And for that stuff at the end, especially with the Twitter praise, I forgive you for saying how Malice beat me to the punch at the top of the thing. Cause that's one of the running jokes. I don't know if you've caught that. People are like, Bob, you're like the poor man's Michael Malice, or you're almost as funny as Malice. And I'm always like, so,
is it? So that I really cut. Oh, okay. Yeah. I didn't mean to cut you like that. I meant to cut you a little.
That's the joke, right? Like that. So okay. I play that up every time someone says that. So now people zing me on purpose, knowing that I'm going to say why I oughta, always in Malice's shadow. Yeah.
I meant to graze you. I didn't mean to really like hit bone. Sorry about that.
Okay. Well, now I've made it even a bigger deal. Okay, joking aside, thank you, Spike. Thanks for your sharing, and thank you, folks, for tuning in. We will see you next time.
You've just experienced another episode of The Bob Murphy Show, the podcast promoting free markets, free minds, and grateful souls. For more information and to subscribe to this podcast, visit bobmurphyshow.com.